Sister State.
Yes.
What? It says there's no signal now.
Is that better?
There.
There we go. Okay. This book has been returned. If you wanted to check it out, because there was somebody who wanted to check it out, but it was already checked out before you got a turn,
I just brought it back.
it's available. Sign on the purple sheet outside the door. That'll be great. I picked this one up at DI this week. I have not read it. I can't vouch for it, but it's the story of a woman who was born and raised Muslim and then joined the church. So if that's more the approach that you would like to take, that's available.
What's her name?
Her name is Ayse Hitchens, A-Y-S-E, Hitchens. Born and raised in Turkey, Istanbul, and ends up in Canada, married to a Mormon. So what are the odds? There you go. Okay, given the current conflict going on in the world, I thought it would be interesting for us to learn a bit more about Islam, and especially about the different kinds of Islam. They're not all the same. And so that's part of what we'll be talking about today. They all come from Hagar, Ishmael, Abraham, that family. They all descend from that in theory. That's the creation story of the Islamic world. How real it is, I have no idea. So last week we had gotten to where Muhammad had started reciting, and he meets some opposition when his uncles and his wife pass away. He loses his protection and he moves to the city of Medina, which is about 200 miles north of Mecca. I don't know if you remember the map that we used, but that's where he goes. And in the city of Medina, he is protected by the Christians and the Jews who live there. And out of that will come special laws about how Islam is supposed to interact with Christianity and Judaism. They are special relatives. Since all three of the people of the book being the Bible, look to Abraham as an important prophet and believe in one God, they therefore are relatives. So Muhammad established that there would be special relationships between us. He gathers followers.
How is Muhammad related to Abraham?
We have no idea. I mean, Muhammad is 700 years after Christ, which means he's 2,500 years after the time of Abraham.
Right.
Nobody has that genealogy.
Okay.
So it is a conceit, you know? It's like people tracing their lineage back to Adam. Right. Okay.
There are people that have done that.
Right. And what they're really doing is playing with old legendary genealogies.
Yeah.
Everybody created genealogies to show that they were related to royalty in the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
There weren't records, and what records there were probably got burned in the 30 Years' War. But the same kind of thing is going on all around the world to connect with whoever's important. So Muhammad gathers followers. One of their most important battles was in Badr, and it's they beat a whole bunch of people who take refuge at Mecca, which is everybody. But it's in 630 that Muhammad is able to take the city of Mecca and make it his, and he clears all of the polytheistic gods out of the Kaaba and establishes the one true God as the only God worshipped there. So it goes from being a town where all these polytheistic tribes can come and be welcomed, and from 630 on, if you're not a Muslim, you might be killed, forced to convert. And that's who the Muslims were struggling with. So the word jihad means an internal struggle. It doesn't mean to go out and kill other people, okay? It's kind of changed its meaning over the years. Supposed to be that battle for kind of the spirit versus the natural man, to use Mormon terminology. Unfortunately, it has become more a battle against any external enemy and doesn't necessarily relate to righteousness. So the idea was the conversion of pagans. So the three groups called the people of the book in Greek being Biblio, Bible. It isn't that all three use all of the Bible, because the Jews don't use the New Testament and the Muslims don't really quote from either, but they do use the stories and they admire many of the leaders. You saw that list the last time we met of the people that Muhammad supposedly met in heaven, right? And they're all Jews or Christians. The Quran uses a lot of biblical stories. The surah or chapter called the cow is the retelling of the golden calf incident at Mount Sinai, for example. So you'll bump into people you know as you read the Quran. This I thought was really an interesting piece. This Venn diagram is looking at how Muslims look at Jesus and how Christians look at Jesus. Now, the consensus among Christians is about as real as the consensus among Muslims, right? There are many Christians who don't believe Jesus is divine, for example. They think he was a great teacher. So the same thing could be said about Islam, that there are a wide range of views, but Muhammad believed that Jesus was the Jewish Messiah and that he would come again, that he was resurrected, and that he was born by a virgin birth and performed miracles. Now that's a lot about Jesus to accept. It doesn't mean that they believe he's the Son of God, because you remember the statement from last week that Muhammad, I think I did in class, Allah is neither begotten nor does he beget. So can you see how that is opposing Christian points of view? He is neither the father of someone nor the son of someone. Yes?
Aren't there enough records about the crucifixion? Why would they not believe he was crucified?
The crucifixion is not a historically recorded event. It is in the Bible, but we do not have contemporaneous Roman records. The Jews will talk about Jesus as one of many who wanted to be the Messiah, proclaim themselves as the Messiah.
And that's still going on today.
Sure. In one of the classes I took, we went through quite a list of people who claim to be the Jewish Messiah. And right now, by law in Israel, because any Jew, I don't know if you know this, but any Jew in the world who can prove that they're Jewish is entitled to Israeli citizenship. And that means if you're born in Africa, but claim that you're Jewish, you can go settle in Israel. And that is way better than staying in some parts of Africa. right? What they did find was there is a genetic marker that is associated with the tribe of Levi. And what they've done is genetic studies across Judaism, because the Jews love science. I mean, there's a lot of Jews in science. And they found that there is a genetic marker for like 80% or more of the people that they tested who claimed to be Kohanim, meaning priests, descendants of Aaron. And they found that genetic marker in a community of East Africans who claimed to be descendants of the Jews. So you can just imagine that in the diaspora, some Jews went south from Egypt, Sudan, and that's where this group was, is in East Africa. Another question?
I'm just wondering, so they would do that with the genetic testing?
That's
That
very
would-
recent,
that
and
would
that's
be
with
valid-
genetic testing.
Valid,
Mhm.
okay.
Genetic testing and finding that marker was considered in the Supreme Court in Israel to be valid proof of being Jewish, and they were given citizenship. The Black Jews of Africa. And so you can read about them. And, you know, that upset some people in Israel because they don't look Jewish. What does that mean, right? And so they've had to work through these issues of what does it mean to be Jewish and how do you prove your genealogy? And in a place where records are not kept, right? Because if they are diaspora Jews from the time of the Babylonian captivity, that's 600 BC. You think there's records from 600 BC on down in Africa? You know, what are the odds? Another question? Any other question? Yes.
Do they have to, they don't have to have that genetic marker, though, to prove they're Jews and
If you
Go to
want to
Israel.
prove that you're Jewish, you either have to have genealogical records, or if you are from East Africa and other members of your tribe have that marker, then you were considered.
is
Jewish.
it just the tribe of Judah they're talking about, or any of the 12 tribes
It's
of Israel?
not Judah, it's Levi. It's through the Levites.
But I mean, to be able to be a citizen of Israel, do you
Anyone,
have to be from the tribe of Judah, or do you have to just prove you're from the 12 tribes of Israel, or what? Do you have to
well, how do you do that, right? And so for at least the last 100 years, the definition of a Jew is someone born to a Jewish woman. So if you can prove that your mother went to synagogue and was accepted and was part of the membership in any given synagogue, or lived in a shtetl in Russia and was clearly Jewish, then you are Jewish. And of course there's problems with proving who's Jewish and who isn't that the Germans confronted, of course, from 32 up through 46, right? As they're trying to prove who is and isn't Jewish. And they didn't care if you'd converted. It doesn't matter what you believe. What mattered to the Germans was, what is your blood? It's a mess, just a mess.
So just,
One more question. Yes,
yeah,
Paul?
so does it carry to only the mother, or is it?
Well, the
or if
problem
the
in,
father marries a
until the
Gentile?
last 50 years, you could not prove paternity, right? Until we have genetic testing, you can't prove paternity. I heard it described this way. The question is, what if your father was Jewish, right? Someone described the difference between knowledge and faith. A Jewish woman knows who the father is. A Jewish man only, or any man, any mother knows who the father is, hopefully. Men have to take it on faith that they're the father of a child. And that idea is why it is always, up until we had genetic testing, it was always the child of a Jewish woman, because you can't prove paternity. Now, at the time of the Holocaust, now you can, Germans I think it was one of 4 of your grandparents, any 4, and your 4 grandparents, if any one of them was Jewish, you are Jewish, whether it's through the father's line or the mother's line. Because the Germans kept records, right? I mean, they're German, so they're going to keep track of who's belonging where. You had to be a member of a church in order to have any legal rights in much of Europe. I don't know if you're aware of that. My grandmother caused a brouhaha up in Sweden when she said, I don't believe any of this Lutheran stuff, when she was about 18. In church, in front of everybody. And that meant you would not have any legal rights if you were not Lutheran. It's a state religion. And so records were kept of whichever denomination, whichever religion you claim to be. And they were taxed according to that, right? The Lutheran Church in the northern part of Germany got the taxes from people because that was the majority church. In the southern Bavarian part of Germany, the Catholic Church got the taxes from people.
Same thing in the UK.
Right, the UK supports the
Church of England.
Church of England through tax monies. And it takes a lot of tax money to keep those buildings open and safe. Good luck.
Okay.
Many of them, of course, have been closed.
When you say scientific, do you mean DNA?
Yeah, because until we had DNA, we couldn't prove paternity.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, moving on. Now, there are 2 major groups. Is that working? Okay. Is it not?
It'll flash occasionally.
Oh, okay,
So
I don't know what to do
just
about that.
Just move like a mouse or something every occasionally.
Oh, okay. We'll be moving much faster here. There are 2 different groups, major groups of Muslims. There are the Sunni and there are the Shiite. And the primary difference is that the Sunnis, when Muhammad died, who takes over? And I like to compare this to the question when Joseph Smith died. Did the authority to run the church go to his son, Joseph III, which is what the reorganized church, now Community of Christ, claimed? Or did it go to his group of followers, the Quorum of the 12? Right? And there's other claimants. But this is essentially the idea of, do you follow Muhammad's relatives, his son-in-law, because he didn't have a son, he had daughters, or do you follow his leaders, the caliphs, kind of like his quorum, although they were warriors rather than whatever. And that's where a big split comes, with the Sunnis following the caliphs and the Shiites following his family. Sunnis are about 90% of Muslims, and they focus on the Sunnah, or the examples of the Prophet, meaning they try to live like him. That's where the name comes from. Shias, or Shiites, follow imams. You've heard that term, right? And so you split, the majority of the Shiites are in Iran and that general area. The Sunnis are North Africa, Saudi Arabia, through Jordan and over into Indonesia, which is the single largest Muslim country in the world. There are 2 million Muslims, and 250 million live in Indonesia. And yet you've never heard of any kind of real terrorism coming
Say
out
that
of
again.
Indonesia.
Say those numbers again.
2
Percentages.
billion,
Oh, billion. Oh,
2
okay.
billion
Oh, okay.
Muslims. 90% are Sunni.
Okay.
10% Shiite, and Indonesia, the single largest country. The next one is Pakistan, and then India, who, I mean, that's kind of ironic, isn't it? And then Bangladesh. And both Pakistan and Bangladesh are the Muslim portions of what used to be India. And at the partition in, what was it, 48? 47, when they divided it up because of the war that was going on, when they got independence from the British, then they start killing each other. The British were kind of acting like a gang who you have to pay tribute to in order to be protected from your neighbors and anyone else, other gangs. And it was keeping the peace between the Hindus, essentially, and the Muslims. Didn't really work, but that was the idea. And so they partitioned off. East India is Bangladesh, West India is Pakistan, and then India in the middle was for the Hindus. Give you an idea. Yes, Randy?
In Dearborn, there's a large Muslim population, and I worked with several of them. And you said that the Sunnis follow the examples of the Prophet. For example, one man I talked to always slept on his right side facing east.
Because Muhammad.
That's what Muhammad did.
Yeah. And they get these stories from a collection called the Hadith. In a way, you can kind of compare the Hadith to the collection of writings in the Talmud or the oral traditions of the Jews. But what it is stories and events, oral traditions that were handed down from the time of Muhammad that got written down by his followers and purport to say what Muhammad's opinion was on any particular subject. This is kind of like everybody quotes Joseph Smith for where the Book of Mormon took place or where the 10 tribes are. And yet you have a variety of opinions that all come from Joseph Smith, right? How valid is any of that oral tradition? Good luck. But those traditions were collected into this set of stories called the Hadith. And so the Hadith is what guides daily practice with any issues that are not answered from the Quran itself. Sharia, I'm sure you've heard of Sharia law. Sharia means the way or the path, and it is believed to be by Muslims a divine legal system. So this is how Muslims believe God wants you, or Allah wants you to act. And that's in terms of religious rituals, family law, daily conduct, how you spend your money, etc. The problem is it's not one single set of laws that you can go to one book and read it. It's how the Hadith is interpreted by different people in different places at different times. And so there are many, many different ways of being Muslim. Okay? And yet, they all claim they're right. Like Christianity.
Do the Shiites and the Sunnis get along?
No, the Shiites and the Sunnis do not get along.
Okay.
My son lived in Qatar, and so we would visit him from time to time. And Qatar is a little thumb-shaped protrusion up from Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
But they refuse to accept Saudi governance. They would not join in the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. They want to be on their own, and because of that, Saudi kind of cut them off economically. And so they turned to Iran on the other side of the Gulf, just a couple of hundred miles away, for support. And so Qatar is much closer to Iran, and the milk that we bought at the store was from Iran. Much of the food came from Iran. So it's odd because they're probably Sunnis in Qatar. But politically, because they refuse to bow to the Saudis, they need support from someone else. They need food from someone else. They need air space. You couldn't fly over Saudi Arabia to get to Qatar. You had to come over and fly over Iran and back across the Gulf to land in Qatar. There's a lot of borders in this world where you have to do absurd things to get across that border. And Paul, you had a question.
Yeah, so that is why, again, the Shiites have so much political feelings towards the rest of
Yeah,
Arabia.
it's kind of like the conflict that was going on in Ireland between the Protestants and the Catholics, right? For how many hundred years were they killing each other, even though they're both Christian? And the same thing is going on with the Sunnis and the Shiites. Now, this gives you some names of some of the different denominations. I don't expect you to know any of these, except maybe you've heard of the Druze, who some of the Druze live in Palestine. And we ate at a Druze restaurant in Palestine. Perhaps you've heard of a whirling dervish. That's a form of Islam. Now, just because of what's going on politically in the world right now, I wanted to read you lists of some of the terror organizations that we come into conflict with that are Muslim. Half of these are Sunni and half are Shiite. And I would bet no one else in this room knows the difference. Okay? So here's a list of Shiite terrorist groups. Now I'm talking from the United States government point of view. Certainly these groups would not be considered terrorists back in their home countries. They're patriots, right? So in Iran, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, they have a break-off group called the Quds Force, which is kind of like the special forces within the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. Have you heard of Hezbollah?
Yeah.
That is a group in Lebanon supported by Iran.
And so they're Shiites, you're saying?
I'm not saying that the people in Lebanon are Shiites. I'm saying that the people funding them are Shiites. Okay? And that's a very important distinction of where does your money come from? Okay, how about Palestinian Islamic Jihad? That's an Iranian-supported group. Or the Houthis in Yemen. Who are the Houthis fighting with? Anybody know?
Israel.
Oh, well, everybody's fighting Israel. But they are on the border of Saudi Arabia. Yemen is down where Mormons think Bountiful was, and the town of Nahom that Lehi and his family passed through. That's Yemen, down on the southwestern edge of Saudi Arabia. And within the Yemenites is a group called the Houthis, who are tired of Saudi control. So they're fighting Saudi Arabia and hence draw the United States in to fight against the Houthis on the side of the Saudis. Okay, so you can see that they would be supported by the Shiites who don't like the Saudis. Okay, last one on the list is Hamas in Palestine. Okay, now I'm going to read the group on the Sunni side, which is Saudi Arabia as the major donor. Hamas. And I thought, okay, this may be the one thing that the Sunnis and the Shiites agree on, and that is they both hate Israel. And one of the best things that you can do if you hate Israel is turn international opinion against Israel. And that's one of the major goals of Hamas. Now, Hamas is an acronym, and I can't say the Arabic, so I can't tell you what it means. But I think you should know that Hamas, that acronym, is also a Hebrew word. It is the Hebrew word for violence. It is not coincidental that they chose that name, right? Although everyone will tell you their goal is peace and a Palestinian nation, if the name of your organization means in your enemy's language violence, and I'm talking about the violence that God saw at the time of Noah, the world was filled with violence. That's Hamas. You can tell what their goal is. It's not to sit down and achieve peace, because neither side is interested in a two-state solution, right? I mean, I don't know that you can take either side. I certainly don't support Hamas, but I also don't support Bibi Netanyahu and his methodology. So you have to find a way to deal with this problem of both sides being at fault, right? Who are you going to support? Who do you give military aid to? Depends on your politics, I guess. So the Islamic State, also known as ISIS, is a Sunni organization. Mainly, its main headquarters was in the area of Syria. The Taliban is a Sunni group that opposes the Shiite majority nationality. The people in Afghanistan their religion is majority Shiite, but the Taliban goes in and enforces their brand of Sharia law, which is Sunni. So, have you heard of Boko Haram down in Nigeria? That's a Shiite group. Hamas, Jamaat Islamiyah, which is in Southeast Asia, so over toward Vietnam, right, and that area. And Al-Shabaab, which is centered in Somalia. Now, I don't know if we really think about these African terrorist organizations as being Muslim, but that's part of the reason behind what they're doing, is to force everybody to accept their version of Islam. It is very much like the Spanish Inquisition, where if you didn't believe, you're burnt at the stake. There is no choice in the matter, right? Okay, so just giving you some vocabulary there, and now we're going to leave all of that dark stuff behind. Because what I'm hoping to do is give you a description of Islam as someone who is Islamic, is a Muslim, would say, yeah, that's what we do. And the majority of Muslims are peaceful. They're not attacking anybody. They're just struggling to make it from day to day. Can you imagine Bangladesh having the military resources to attack anybody? And yet there are problems in Bangladesh with the Rohingya, which are Muslims who are being harassed in countries next to Bangladesh, so they run to Bangladesh for protection. How bad do you need help if you go to Bangladesh to get help? Right? I think that we need to think about that as we think about how harassed many immigrants are that are moving around in the world today. That they would choose to move to Bangladesh, which it goes underwater in the floods almost every year. It's not a great place to live physically. So the religion of Islam this mentions 5 pillars, but I wanted you to see that the word Muslim, Muslim or Muslim means one who submits. Islam is submission, and a Muslim is one who submits. They put an M on the front of the verb just like the Jews do. Okay, and you get one who submits to God. Islam is similar to Mormons and Jews in that they have a health code of like the word of wisdom. It is called halal in terms of meat. And if you cannot find halal meat marked with letters saying it is halal, meaning that the animals have been slaughtered in a way that causes the least amount of pain. It's using a very humane method of slaughtering. And you want to think about who would choose to do that. Why would you choose to do that? How do you feel about animals? Because that's your theology, right? It is very similar to kosher meat. And so our friends who lived in the Detroit area, if they couldn't find halal chicken somewhere, they would buy kosher because it is produced at the same type of plants, slaughterhouses. And in terms of beef, I'm not sure about all the others, but with cattle, it is one cut from one side of the throat to the other side, quick, fast, and efficient. If you have to make a second cut in order to kill the animal, it is no longer kosher or halal. That's the strictness. And they have religious people on location watching the slaughter of every single animal to make sure that it is halal. They do not eat pork. They're supposed to recite a phrase a prayer before they kill an animal. The only place I remember ever seeing that in the movies is among Native Americans, right? Who will often say a prayer thanking the animal for what it has done to give my family life. Very similar that way. Muslims are not supposed to drink alcohol. Now, they take that to the point that in Qatar you cannot buy vanilla extract because it has alcohol in it, right? And yet, I'm sure that you have all heard of some Muslims who were drinking. I mean, we all hear about that in the same way that Mormons don't drink, right? Do you know any Mormons who drink? Of course you do. And the same thing is true in Islam. God has given them this direction. They should not fight except for a religious cause. They're not to gamble, and they're to give money to help the poor, and be kind to strangers, orphans, and widows. A lot of this is derivative of the book of Leviticus. I hope you can see that. Very much like Jewish ideas. So these are the 5 pillars of Islam, and these are considered the 5 most important beliefs and actions within Islam. And we'll go through each of these, starting in the middle with the single most important one, Shahada, which is the belief in Allah. Now, this is a very typical of the calligraphy that you see on all kinds of buildings, monuments, books, everywhere. Just as Jews were told not to make any graven images, so many Muslims believe you should not make any graven images. And so the decorations that they use is calligraphy, it's words. It is not doing pictures of people or animals or anything. This is actually writing saying that Allah is one. And that's a very typical thing to see carved in stone or written or baked into tiles on a building. This would be a statement of what they believe about God. Now, the Jews have a statement called the Shema that Jews say twice a day and when they're being killed. And the Shema is, "Hear, O Israel." That "hear" is Shem, Shama, like Samuel. Shemuel is hears and God. That word is hear, and "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one." This is very much the same kind of statement. Allah, He is one. All creatures need Him. He begets not, nor was He begotten. There is none co-equal or comparable to Him. I hope you can see how that is written against Christian teachings. It's to distinguish themselves from being Christians and how they see God. There are articles of faith. Now, I didn't know about this until about 10 years ago. There are 13 articles of Jewish faith written by a 12th century guy named Maimonides. And I personally think that Joseph Smith learned about the 13 articles of faith from Hugh Nibley's grandpa, Alexander Niebuhr, who was living in Nauvoo, was a convert to the church, and was helping Joseph further his Hebrew education.
Was he Jewish then?
He was Jewish, oh yeah. A Jewish convert, German Jew. And I think that when Joseph heard about 13 articles of faith, that's what prompted him to use that number. Maybe, maybe not. Can't prove
What
it.
was his name again?
Alexander Niebuhr, Niebuhr, grandpa of Hugh Nibley.
Oh.
Belief in the unity of the one God. Think of our first article of faith, right? Belief in the angels of God. Belief in Scripture, in this case the Quran. Belief in the prophets of God. Now there the different groups will separate in who you believe as a prophet, depends on are you Shiite or Sunni, right? Belief in the general resurrection of everybody and the acceptance of fate. Now that's very interesting to me because we talk about agency as being a critically important piece of our theology, right? And yet fate implies no agency. And so one of the statements that you'll hear from Muslims is, "Insha'Allah." They'll say, I'll meet you on Tuesday, Insha'Allah, which means if God allows it. Now that is such a, okay, this is not Islamic, but it's a great catchphrase and person to blame. If you don't get there, it's because God didn't will it. Anything that happens, you can say, well, that was God's decision. Randy.
Spain was ruled by Muslims for a long time.
Yeah, the wars.
And they still have the phrase, "Oh Allah,"
Which is,
God willing.
Oh.
Allah.
I gotcha.
From the Muslim tradition.
Okay.
But they'll say that all the time. Are you coming to church next week? Oh Allah.
Okay. And there are times when I hear this kind of thing coming out of Mormons. And I think, have you thought about this theologically? When you say God has made everything happen that happens. If somebody dies, it's because God chose for them to die. He needs them. Right? Theologically, there's some problems there. There's some real issues there with what many of us say. And I hope that if nothing else comes out of this class that I teach, it's that you're going to be a little more careful about the things you say. Is that theologically correct? Is that really true about God? Do we believe in agency or not? Okay? And of course it's problematic because we want, along with many other Christians, we will say that God is omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent. Okay, folks, omnipresent? How can you be omnipresent if you have a physical body? You are not using that word the same way other Christians do. Omniscient? That becomes a problem. Does he know what you're going to do tomorrow? If he does, is it because he's in charge of what you do tomorrow? And omnipotent. Don't use that word if you're Mormon, folks. The Book of Mormon teaches that God obeys laws, and if he were to break the law, he would cease to be God. That is the opposite of omnipotent. He obeys laws. He does not do anything he darn well pleases, which is theoretically how we think our leaders should be. Right? Don't we believe in a rule of law? That's because that's our theology as well. Does that apply to everybody? Can you see how we should integrate our theology with our thinking a little, and our statements maybe a little closer? Okay, the second pillar is prayer, and there was that funny statement from last week where Moses says, talk God down. There's no way they're going to do it 50 times a day. So these are the times of day that you pray. If you are very, I hate to use the word, but orthodox, okay? If you're really a committed Muslim who is keeping every single rule 5 times a day, you would pray. And so the Adhan, come to God, come to prayer, is called out by the Muezzin from a mosque 5 times a day. And if you're living in countries that have mosques, which includes Frankfurt, Germany, and Detroit, Michigan, and Bosnia, and London, absolutely, and almost everywhere in the UK, you will hear the cry of the muezzin. Usually now it is a recording, rather than an individual climbing up in that tower and having a really loud voice, because now we can broadcast it, right? And they will say, Allah, Allahu Akbar, right? You've heard that. That is, God is great. Allahu Akbar is God is great. And then in Arabic, this is what they are saying as they are called to come for prayer. Allah, Allahu Akbar. There are, however, conditions that must be met for your prayer to be acceptable before God. And this is not quite how Mormons think about, we'll pray anywhere, anytime, right? They have conditions that must be met. And one of them is you have to wash before prayer. And that doesn't mean take a bath. It means you wash your hands, you wash your feet, you wash your face. essentially. Your hands to your elbows, your face to your ears, up to your hairline. Good luck with the beard. And so outside of mosques, you will see racks where people have left their sandals and water where you can sit and wash your hands and your feet and your face. And the problem is, if you think of Saudi Arabia, can you imagine Muslims being in a location where they don't have water? Well, sure. So you can wash with sand or dirt. And I think that's really a fascinating adaptation. And so it becomes a ritual rather than a literal washing, right? Randy, question, comment?
Like using water instead of wine.
Water instead of
Wine.
wine, sure. I mean, most religions make adaptations that make sense so that people can keep the law. Okay, you need to be properly clothed. And so these are just some images to show typical Muslim attire for prayer. Depending on your type of Islam, some require women to be covered like this all the time. In Iran at the moment, it's, I don't even have Iran's coverage here, where they have head to toe covered in black. And there's a little panel of kind of lace or net that you can look through, but the woman is completely covered from head to toe. You can't see her arms, her face, anything. The majority of Muslims are not that radical, but they still are going to cover up. Some only for prayer, some all the time. And this has become a bit of an issue in other countries where Muslims are not the majority. Are you allowed to have a face covering in a country where they're doing facial recognition for watching out for criminals?
Or for security.
Right, for security purposes. They want to do a scan, and you can't have a face covering for a scan. Well, there's women who cannot go out in public then because they will not uncover their face in public. Kids at school. Kids at the schools my kids went to were not allowed to wear hats or head coverings. But Muslims are required to, some girls. So how does the school work with that? What about school prayer? Muslims are required to pray 5 times a day, regardless of where they are. So many school districts in the Detroit area and throughout the UK, I am sure, have a room that the Islamic kids go to and pray during the school day because they're required to do it. They do not set aside a room for Christians to go and pray. Because you're not required to do it at a certain hour, right? Unless you live in the South, and then it may be in every classroom it starts with a prayer, whether you want to say it or not. Do you remember those days?
Yeah.
When school started with prayer?
We did.
Yeah. And the Pledge of Allegiance. And so you kind of want to step back and say, oh, how does that work if we're imposing our form of prayer on someone else? Question, comment.
How old are the girls when they have to start dressing like this, and why is it only girls? Why is it?
Oh, well, because it's patriarchy, you know. It's when a girl reaches menarche, when she begins to menstruate. And of course, just like everywhere else in the world, the men make the rules for the women to follow. But it's the women who enforce them on other women, very often. And so we can't blame it all on men if it's the mothers and grandmothers who are saying, get that scarf on. Right? I can't remember the name of the book. It's a short children's book about a girl who becomes an Olympic fencer. And her decision to wear the hijab, the head covering, and what it meant to her. Now, my daughter ran cross country, and the teams were expected to be uniform. So everyone had to dress exactly the same. Not the color of your shoes, but everything else was the same. So if they're wearing a singlet and bun huggers, which is what the short shorts, like you'll see in women's volleyball, everyone had to dress like that if you wanted to compete. But Islamic girls could wear a body stocking that covered their head, neck, arms to the wrist, legs down into their shoes. And in winter, that seemed like they had a little advantage there. I mean, we lived on the edge of Lake Erie, and when the wind came across, the wind chills and the freezing rain, and you're in a singlet and bun huggers, your legs are bright red and maybe welts and swollen from running in that freezing rain. So who gets concessions and who doesn't? That's a tough call. And those are some of the issues that come up in free nations that you don't get to make that choice in, say, Iran or Saudi Arabia. Randy actually considered going to work in Saudi Arabia when we were first married. And I think that after marrying me, he had a second thought that I don't think she's going to keep all of those rules. I don't think we should move there. That won't be a good idea. And that was a good idea not to move there.
Would have tripled my salary.
Triple his salary, but he would have lost a wife. So there you go. So when you pray, there's a certain position that you take, and that is eventually, in the process of prayer, you end up kneeling on the ground, head to the floor. And so people who pray 5 times a day and are very serious about it will often get a mark on their forehead from where the weight of their head has caused a bruise to form there. You pray, if you can, on a prayer rug. And I have friends who are from Salem. Some of you probably know Sherry Swenson. Sherry and I were good friends when we were children. And back then she was Shari. But her grandfather was Muslim, and they knew that because he had a prayer rug. But they didn't know until his funeral what his name was or what country he was from, because he was worried that he was going to get sent back. And so he went by the last name of Frank, and his daughter, Sylvia, tried to do her best at writing out his obituary, and her dad's friends came to the funeral and said, "You got it all wrong. He's from Afghanistan." His name was, and so I thought it was really, really cool that when we were serving the refugees in Europe, Sherry and Craig were called to work with young single adults, and she would volunteer at the refugee camp in Frankfurt, and they were all Afghans. And she was able to talk with them and say, my great-grandpa, my grandfather is an Afghan. We have something in common. So, being a Muslim early in the United States was probably scary. They were probably mistreated just as much as the Jews and the Catholics and the Mormons in the South, right? But this is an individual prayer rug, and the one on the right is a carpet. And when you go to a mosque, the entire room is filled with a carpet that has these individual woven indications of where you pray, so that everybody knows where you're going to kneel, where you're going to stand, where you're going to pray. And of course, that's just the men. Okay? The women are in another room in the building. They do not pray together. I don't know how this works at the during the Hajj for prayer, but that shows everybody facing the Kaaba. It's not that you're facing east. Many people say, oh, you face east. Well, you face east because we're west of Mecca. People who are east of Mecca face west. Everybody faces the Kaaba as they pray. So you need to have a compass for you to find out which way is Mecca. And I think that this statement is a good one for prayer, attributed to Muhammad. This is very much the hadith. O my companions, if there is a stream running in front of a person's home and he takes a bath 5 times a day in it, do you think any dirt will remain on him? They say, no, no dirt will remain. The Holy Prophet then said, that is the example of the 5 daily prayers. Because of them, Allah, holiness to his name, that's the SWT. There's always a little emblem in the Quran. Every time it mentions the name of God, there's a holiness to emblem. Wipes away all the sins of a person in each prayer. And so how many sins are you going to have if you pray and repent 5 times a day? Women do pray. They just pray in a different room than the men. At home, they might pray together, but if you're a more fundamentalist Muslim, you will not be praying in the same room with your wife. And there is personal prayer. After you go through the recited prayers, you then pray for your own needs. And so they actually do personal giving my own words in prayer, which is not true for a lot of Christians who only use, and many Jews, only recite written prayers. They will also pray using beads. This is not a rosary. It looks a lot like a rosary. It works a lot like a rosary. It's not a rosary. And they will recite using these beads. There's 33 beads going around. And they will use those beads to recite the 99 names of God. Now, have any of you seen the art exhibit that was up in Orem and at BYU, where there's a Mormon who is doing cubes, glass cubes, one for each of the 99 names of God? Okay, it was pretty cool. If you ever get a chance to see it. I did a paper on the 99 names of God. And you can see that they are titles rather than names, right? And if you go to the Bible, not the Bible dictionary, the topical guide, you'll find Jesus Christ names of. And it gives all these different names that are titles, right? The Word, the Lamb, the Light of the World. These are very much that same kind of thing. And so if you hear about Allah, Al-Rahman, that's the most compassionate and merciful. And the words, Rahman, is the same word as the Hebrew mercy, Rechem. That's how close Arabic and Hebrew are. They use the same triliteral roots in most of their verbs. And so you'll notice that as-salam Salem, peace, right? And so if you take the time and you know one of the languages, you can read the other. If you know the alphabet. Good luck with that. Arabic has at least 3 different forms of each of their letters. The form that's used at the start of a word, the form used in the middle of the word, and the form that is used at the end of the word. Initial, medial, and finial. And so there are about 66 or more forms of the letters, much more than you need to learn in English. Randy?
In Detroit again, I worked with a man who was a faithful Muslim. His shirt had a pocket sewn onto the end of it, and he would put his hand in, and there his beads were.
That's where his beads were?
So he could drive with both hands, but then he'd put one hand down and work through his beads.
And the beads are just a counter for you to go around. Some Muslims don't do the 99 names of God every time. They do a single phrase for each bead, like Allahu Akbar, God is great. And this is a lot more like how Catholics will use the rosary, right? They're saying the same thing over and over and over and over again. And that is very much like what goes on in Tibetan form of Buddhism. And there they'll have like a thing that spins, that has a tassel on it. And so it spins, the weight of the tassel makes this cylinder spin. And every time that cylinder goes around, it's reciting a prayer. And so as you walk down the street, you spin all of the cylinders, and that recites all those prayers to God. Okay, the next is zakat, or charity. Now, one huge difference between Islam, Sunni Islam, 90% of Islam, and the Mormon Church is they have no central governing authority. Each mosque is independent. So who do you pay your tithing to? Well, they don't have tithing. They may have dues. I haven't actually checked this out. Synagogues, same thing is true for Jews. They don't have one central authority, except in Israel where they have a Supreme Court and a government, right? But in other places, it's the group, like in Salt Lake, the group that's running your synagogue. You pay dues to be a member of the synagogue. And the dues allow you to show up at synagogue on the high holy days. And if you haven't paid your dues, you don't get in. You don't get a ticket without having paid your dues. So having to meet a certain financial obligation in order to go into a holy place, does that sound familiar? Mm-hmm. Okay, so we can be critical of others and yet not see that we're doing the same thing. But because there's no central authority, who are you going to give your fast offerings to? Who are you going to be giving charity to? And so there's 2 things that go on. One is they came up with in the Hadith a decision that you need to pay 2.5% of your total personal worth each year. Now that's not your income that year. We're talking all the money in your IRA, in all of the buildings, homes you own, your motor home, your cars, whatever you've got, some annuity somewhere, you add it all together and you donate 2.5% of that in charity. That is often more than 10% of your income, right?
And that
charity.
goes to this individual synagogue.
The charity goes to whoever you choose to give it to,
Oh,
okay?
I like the fast offering more.
It's a little, well, yeah, but you don't get to choose who your fast offering goes to. The bishop and the church does, right? They're the ones who decide on the $1.5 billion that we're giving in charity. You can choose to give more that is directed just to charity by giving to LDS Philanthropies or whatever. But the idea is that you should be constantly looking for people who need help and give. Not just once a year, but throughout your life, and should be helping. There are many Muslim aid organizations. Comparable to the Red Cross is the Red Crescent. All right, they're not going to use the cross, but it does the same thing. There's an organization that we worked with called Muslim Aid, and we funded greenhouses in Bosnia for war victims. Now, this is the war when Serbia was bombing Bosnia in the 90s, right? We kind of even forget that war even happened. But many families lost their fathers, their grandfathers, their sons in that war. Or the men have injuries or PTSD severe enough that they cannot provide for their family. And so each family that has someone suffering from the war can submit a request to Muslim Aid to have a greenhouse on their property to grow food. That extends their growing season, and this is one of our greenhouses, and they all grew the same thing. Tomatoes, green peppers, cucumbers, artichokes, and onions. And you ate those 5 vegetables breakfast, lunch, and dinner in the Balkan countries. It's very interesting. But 1/3 of the greenhouse was paid for by LDS Charities, 1/3 by Muslim Aid, and 1/3 by the recipient. And then they're given 26 weeks of training. And they selling what they have more than they need to eat enables them to pay the dues, the fees to put their kids in school, or buy shoes, or medicine. It's a wonderful idea. And the man that we were working with, who was about our age, said, now, he was the head of Muslim Aid in the city of Sarajevo. And he said, I am not involved because I suffered in the war, nor did my dad or any of my sons. But after the war was over, my son, when he was about 9, stepped on a landmine left by the Serbians, and it blew off both of his legs and both of his arms. And it was the US military who took him to their hospital and saved his life, and they took him back to the United States and fitted him with arms and legs, and have done that through his whole life as he grew up, and he's now going to the university in America. I love America. How should we be using our tax dollars? How do we create goodwill for the United States in other countries? That's what we learned on our mission, is what is the best way to spend American money? So the 4th pillar is fasting during the month of Ramadan, which we're in right now. And that means from sunrise to sunset, you do not eat. And in order to determine when sunrise is and sunset in the place you live, you have to have it exactly to the minute. And so the Muslims created the astrolabe. And every astrolabe is specific to the latitude that you live at. And so it changes. Randy was just checking on when the spring equinox is going to be. And it's different in Utah when it starts than it is in Salt Lake, than in St. George or down in Phoenix, depending on your latitude.
March 17th instead of March 20th, which is the equatorial equinox.
Okay. And so astronomy and algebra are Islamic arts in order for them to practice their religion. So you need to find out when the fast is going to start and when it's going to end based on where you live. What are you fasting from? Eating and drinking. No water, no food from sunrise to sunset. Now, that might not seem too bad, but if you're in Qatar and Ramadan happens to hit in June, July, or August, and it's 140 degrees outside and the sun is up for 16, 18 hours a day at that point, it's really hard. And you are not allowed to ever eat in public during Ramadan, no matter what religion you have. You cannot eat or drink in public. No intimate relations, no taking medicine through your mouth, or a shot. Now, this is tough. No smoking or sniffing any drugs either. So it's a little bit stricter than our fast, but it's a lot shorter. I mean, it's not 24 hours a day, it's from sunrise to sunset, but it's for 28 consecutive days. So that can be hard. You are only obligated to fast if you're sane, if you're healthy, meaning you don't have to take a medication, if you're not traveling, because traveling is going to change what you're able to do, and if you're not menstruating. So women have to fast at a different time, which is hard if you're regular on your menstrual cycle. Because when are you going to have 28 straight days when you're not menstruating? Good luck with that. Question?
I just remember reading about some professional athletes when it was like the middle of, I can't remember what tournament it was going on, but it was during Ramadan, and
Right.
they couldn't drink water
Right.
while they were having basketball games. That would
Or any of
that
the
would be hard.
Olympic events.
that would
yeah.
be really hard.
And so when we were in Qatar, many people simply slept all day. If you can sleep through the fast because you don't have to work, and in Qatar everybody's a millionaire if you're a Qatari. They share the wealth that they have as a nation with every citizen. Different amounts, but still, you're rich enough that you don't have to work. But Ramadan really is a month of eating, because from sunset to sunrise, you party. And you might as well sleep in the day. And to mark the end of Ramadan, you have a big feast together and give to the poor. And it's a huge deal.
In Detroit, many people were heavier at the end of Ramadan
Yeah.
than at the beginning.
Yeah, because you're eating more. It's like Christmas. Do you gain any weight over the holidays?
And we had a taste of that with Jake Retzloff, the BYU quarterback,
Uh-huh.
during Ramadan, and he had to be doing athletic things, and I can't remember how he phrased it, but he said, "No, I will not fast. I'll do something different to show my."
I don't know if I did. Yes, there it is. If you break the fast, you can make up for it by freeing a slave, fasting continuously for 60 days, or feeding 60 people. So maybe he was donating to feeding the poor. The last pillar is the Hajj, and this is the annual trek to Mecca. You have to get a ticket years ahead to get in. 3 million people typically go there each year. It begins before you arrive. In order to cross the borders into Saudi Arabia, you have to already be dressed properly, and that's in white. The men have 2 pieces of white fabric that they wrap around themselves. Women wear regular clothing, but it's white. On the first day of the Hajj, you go 7 times around the Kaaba. Now, you can just imagine what it would be like to have 3 million people all trying to get into the same space. On the second day, you try to get up and touch the Kaaba. And particularly in two locations. One is to touch the black stone, which has been set into the side wall. The black stone has been tested and found to be a meteorite. And they felt it was a sign from God, you know, this stone that fell from heaven. And so it's holy. And you want to touch the black stone, and you want to stand where Abraham stood, Ibrahim, when he and Ismail built the Kaaba, because that's the conceit, right, that it's their temple. And so they have this small area that marks the footprints of Abraham. So getting inside there and being able to do that, good luck with 3 million people. On the second day, you're going to run between the two hills like Hagar searching for water. Now, if it's June and 140 degrees outside in Saudi Arabia, and you're running 7 times between these two hills, people would die. And so the Saudis have built a runway, a building that runs between the two hills, and it has 3 or 4 floors and multiple lanes, and the handicap lanes go right down the middle. And so they're air conditioned so that you don't die on the Hajj. On the second day, you also are to drink from the well that the angel showed to Hagar, and it's called the Zamzam well. Well, how are you going to get 3 million people to drink from that one well in one day? So they fill up the jugs all year long. And to date, the well has never run dry. So everybody gets to drink from the well. They pour it from the big blue jug into these earthen jars and then give everybody a drink. And you also get a little amulet that you hang around your neck that has the water from the Zamzam well. On the next couple of days, you go out to Mina, which is the location where they believe that Abraham offered his son as a sacrifice, right? That's the idea. Many believe within Islam that it was Ismail, some don't. But they go there and will sacrifice rams at that location at the end of the Hajj. Can you see how they're reenacting events from the life of Hagar and Abraham? They then go to a mountain, which is where Muhammad delivered a farewell sermon, very much like the Sermon on the Mount. So you want to go there. And they also believe that is where Adam and Eve landed on earth after they were thrown out of heaven. I didn't realize that getting kicked out of the Garden of Eden was thrown out of heaven. But that's how we tell the story. And it is where Adam was forgiven, like in the book of Moses. Adam, your sins are forgiven. And your children don't carry sin on your head. That's a common belief between Muslims and Mormons, that we are not responsible for the sin of Adam and Eve. And so it is called the mountain Jabal al-Rahmah, the Mount of Mercy. They then will sleep out on those plains as Ismail and Ibrahim did. The next day they're going to pick up rocks to throw at Satan, because the tradition is that Satan appeared and tried to get Ibrahim to stop and not sacrifice his son. And so you're going to fight off Satan by throwing rocks at Satan. They've set up pillars that represent Satan. And so these millions of people are throwing upwards of 70 stones each at those pillars in that week. And how many millions of rocks is that? So clearly they clear out the rocks at the end of the Hajj and go dump them back out on the plain. Just like if you go to Israel and you're in the valley of Elah where David fought Goliath, there are rocks there, and you pick up 5 small stones, just like David did. We did it for each of our kids and close friends, and apparently every couple of months they bring in a truck and dump rocks so that there's enough rocks. On the 5th day, you perform animal sacrifice. Now, back hundreds of years ago, when there were only like maybe 1,000 people doing the Hajj, because how were you going to get there to Saudi Arabia? It was reasonable for you to sacrifice an animal there. Now it would be 3 million goats or so, and they would all lay rotting in the sun because you have no refrigeration for them. And so they have changed the process. You buy a certificate that is the value of a goat. And then that certificate is sent, and the money is sent to mosques throughout the world. And at the hours that you are required to sacrifice, goats are being sacrificed all over the world, and that food is given to the poor. So it's not wasted. I think that's a really great idea. At the end of the Hajj, all the men shave off their hair, not their beard, but all their hair, and then we'll wear a cap, which goes around and has a flat top, or is a skull cap kind of cap. Women are only to cut off the length of a fingertip because their hair is their glory, and nobody gets to see it anyway. But you can tell who is a Haji, which is someone who has been on the Hajj. Our friends, well, I'll talk about that when I get to them. You then repeat the going around the Kaaba and stoning of Satan. And then finally on the 7th day, you do, again, you go around. And then if you have the time, you go to Medina to go to the mosque that is built there that was Muhammad's mosque and pray there. Now, anyone who could afford to go on the Hajj but couldn't get there, if you have the money to pay for the journey, you are required to go. But if your health is not good, if there was no way for you to get from, I don't know, South Africa up there, or from Indonesia to Saudi Arabia, and so you die without having performed the Hajj, one of your descendants can go in your place. So our friends, Shahzad and Samreen Zadi, this is one of Randy's engineers, went on the Hajj. And they said, we had enough time at the end that Shahzad went for his grandpa and Samreen went for her grandma. And we're thinking, work for the dead. Have we ever heard of that before? But they brought us back dates, but they did not bring any pictures. They didn't take a camera because this is a holy experience and you're not going to be taking pictures. Now, if you are not Muslim, you are not allowed in Mecca. But there is a way that you too can see Mecca, and that's by watching the movie Malcolm X. Because Malcolm X joined, what's it called in America?
Islam Brotherhood.
It is the Islamic Brotherhood, but it has another name. But it was founded by Elijah Muhammad. It is an American version of Islam in which white people are the devil. And so the majority of people who join the Islamic Brotherhood, and that's not the name of it, that's the group in Egypt, are Black Americans. And they proselyte in prisons because so many young Black men get sent to prison. And they're in prison because of drug use, because they committed a crime while they were drunk. For some reason, their lifestyle led them to doing something that got them in trouble with the white policemen in their area. And so they get sent off to prison. And by joining this brotherhood, they commit to living a clean life, no alcohol, no drugs, no sex with anyone but their wife. They dress in suits and shirts and ties. And Malcolm X, they often will wear a cap, but not always, joined that brotherhood, and it completely changed his life. And then he found out that Elijah Muhammad was not abiding by those standards. And so he decided he would go and see what Islam really was in the rest of the world. And he went on the Hajj, where he met with Muslims who were blonde and blue-eyed, and people from all over the world, and it changed how he saw Islam. It is a fascinating film.
Documentary.
No, it's a movie made with Denzel Washington playing the part of Malcolm X. But they had an all-Islamic film crew to go in and film the Hajj. And so you actually get to see these places in Saudi Arabia. It's fascinating. I recommend that you use something like VidAngel, because the first part of the film is pretty rough to look at. Malcolm White was his name when he was a kid, to see what his life was like before his conversion is pretty rough. But it's a way to see the Hajj and the change in his life. And that's where class is going to end. What I hope...
One more.
Okay, Randy?
You said they do the Hajj every year, but it's required by Muslim or by Islam that you do it once in your life.
Right,
And
you
you
go
never said
once, but it happens once a year. It isn't any time. There is 1 week during the year when you go on the Hajj. And you have to buy a ticket to get on that Hajj years ahead. And so that's kind of how it works. Now, what I hope you'll get from this is a better understanding of what the teachings of Muhammad are. Not necessarily how some of his followers have interpreted those teachings and how they're living. One thing that I always like to bring up is before the time of Muhammad, many baby girls were left out in the desert just to die after they were born, because you're talking about nomadic tribesmen who are battling with other tribes all the time. And girls are just going to use up your resources. You can't have them be soldiers in battle. So what use are they? Muhammad comes along and says, God has said you may have 4 wives, which means 4 times as many girls are allowed to live. Now, I'm not suggesting their lives are great, but at least they live. And that's a huge difference. And there are things about Islam that we can learn from in how they try to live a holy life that may apply to us as we try to become a more holy people ourselves. And I leave that with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.